All right, we're back here on the Ari Lewis Show on Israel National Radio, Route Sheva. The show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is free to do so. And a writer on JApp. JApp is a Jewish application which has shiurim from big rabbis as well as lectures from historians and episodes of this program. You can find JApp by going to www.j-app.me, or you can download JApp from iTunes or Google Play stores. And we're continuing the conversation with writer and social commentator Ze'ev Ben Yechiel. Ze'ev, the people of Islam, if Islam has evil tenets and they're in the non-maturation process like the Christians were doing the Crusades, would therefore the people of Islam, the Muslims, be evil?
Well, if you notice, I didn't actually make a call on whether or not Islam is evil. I think making a statement like that depends heavily on your definition of terms, what you mean by Islam, what you mean by evil, and I think the yardstick of evil is whether it produces, or let's say an evil belief system is when it produces evil acts that you can say are directly attributable to that belief system, and that the interpretations from that within that belief system that produce such acts are an integral part of the belief system. So yes, there are parts of Islam that you can say are evil, but again, it depends on whether the Quran says that you should actually go and blow yourself up in a marketplace and kill innocent civilians for the sake of spreading the faith. And it really depends, I think, on the interpretation of Islam. But it's certainly a belief system that fosters the growth of evil, and that seems to encourage it and to tolerate it. And the clergy, the Islamic clergy, certainly seem to support it in their sermons and in their fatwas, their edicts. And I think that, again, the extent to which a Muslim is evil or not depends entirely on their personal conduct and their the beliefs that they adhere to and how it comes out in their actions. Do I think there are good Muslims in the world? Undoubtedly. What percent of Muslims around the world are good and what percent are evil? I have absolutely no authority to say. And in the end, I think only God can be the judge of what's in a person's heart. Even good people can do bad things sometimes. The question is if there's a systematic source for a systematic pattern of evil behavior. So I think we've seen in recent decades that there has been a systematic display of violence and cruelty and savagery that's sprung from Muslim ideology. And some of it is political, but I think a lot of it is spiritual. I think it requires a belief in something beyond this physical, transient world, beyond the material world, to be able to sacrifice your life for the sake of this cause, and to do it, moreover, to do it in such a violent way. So I think there is definitely a transcendent element behind all of this terrorism, and I think it has its root in Islam. So I think that the question of whether, as a collective, Muslims are good or evil is not a simple one to answer. I can't really answer the question because it's really it's a trick question. I can tell you a story that recently happened to me. I ran into a young guy who's a soldier from South Africa, a soldier in the IDF, and he works in the Minhal Ezachi, the civil authority, which essentially is the Israeli government's arm in Judea and Samaria, the administrative arm in Judea and Samaria. And among other things, the civilian authority oversees the supply of essential services and goods and aid supplied by various international organizations, non-governmental organizations, such as medical care and other infrastructural needs. And the civil authority ensures that this aid goes through. And I told the soldier, I said, when he told me that this is actually what he works on, this is part of his job as a soldier, is ensuring the delivery of these goods and services to the Arab population in Judea and Samaria. I said, you do understand, don't you, that you are feeding the hand that bites? And I think that's a point that really needs to be made. I think that in the discussion of good and evil, we can say that there's a mass adherence to some evil beliefs, that even if a Muslim behaves in his own daily life in a way that doesn't express those beliefs, the fact that he still is a professing Muslim, assuming that he is. Of course, there are Muslims who criticize Islam, most of whom, those who publicly criticize it have essentially distanced themselves from Islam, because there's only a certain extent to which you can denounce jihad before you really no longer subscribe to Islam, because it is such an essential part of Islam. But let's say that the majority of the population, for the sake of argument, in Judea and Samaria are professing Muslims, and I think that's statistically verifiable. Then they're professing a faith, and they're identifying with a belief system that calls for the destruction of the state of Israel by the fact that Islam calls for the destruction of any regime that threatens the expansion or that resists the expansion of Islam, especially one that happens to sit smack dab in the geographical middle of the Muslim world. And recent polls have suggested that around half, some of them actually found over half, recent poll I think said that 70% or something like that, of Muslim Arabs in the West Bank supports terrorism, at least passively, ideologically, and the passive support is actually very, very critical in sustaining a certain level of terrorism. When you have entire populations out in the street, all generations, kids, adults, elderly, cheering and throwing candy when an Israeli civilian is murdered by a terrorist, that suggests that as a whole, the nation, the group of people that we're talking about, the Muslim Arabs in the West Bank, are enemies of the state, and that they, somewhere or other, are either working towards or are supporting, striving for the eventual destruction of the Jewish state. And I tried to make this point to him, to this young soldier, and his answer was, well, if we don't ensure their access to these humanitarian services, they'll elect an extremist Islamic government like Hamas that are going to wage war against us. And I said, well, listen to what you just said. You said we're basically accommodating them because we're afraid of what they'll do if we don't. And that means that we're essentially, pardon the language, well and truly screwed. That they have us by the you-know-whats, and they're calling the shots. And I think that it's very true that if you look at the way that Islam works, that Muslim Arab societies work, they're very much a power-based culture. So when the way it works is that if your opponent, competitor, adversary, neighbor, if he shows signs of conciliation, if he takes a step in your direction or allows you to advance into his interests, then he's showing weakness. And the Muslim Arab response to that weakness is to take advantage of it, to expand your interest, to take one step closer towards conquering your neighbor. And this is a very, very fundamental principle in Arab culture, and it's one that doesn't leave much room for negotiation in the end or conciliation, because the more that we give, the more that the state of Israel gives away, the more the state of Israel negotiates and offers and actually gives and steps back from its own national territorial interests, the more that the Arabs are going to be encouraged to keep pressing their cause. It's not, there's a mistaken belief in the West, right, that if we just come to some kind of agreement that if we give in to a certain limited amount of demands, then the problem will go away. That the Arab interests, the so-called Palestinians, are going to go home and be satisfied with their part of the agreement, their part of the bargain. And that's just not true. Because, like I said, in Islam, you have the moral, ethical, religious, godly imperative to conquer the world. And nothing short of that is going to satisfy you. And that attitude is also reflected in the way that Islam relates to political agreements made with non-Muslims. It basically has almost no respect for those agreements. There's any agreement is limited, at least in certain contexts, is limited to 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, and agreements with non-Muslims can be broken outright if need be. And it just goes to show that there, even on a doctrinal, official level, there's not much to be gained by making agreements and being conciliatory and stepping back to let a Muslim interest take something from you, because it's only going to encourage them to push more. We saw this, of course, in the pullout from Gaza, right, where before the rockets were falling on the terrorist attacks were happening within the Gaza Strip at a periodic, sporadic level against the Jewish settlers there. And of course, after we pulled out, we've had 3 entire wars in which the entire country was a target, the firing zone for these rockets. So whereas the battlefront was just within Gaza, after the pullout, the battlefront became all of the country of Israel. And so I think that any step in the direction of conciliation with a Muslim Arab entity today is an invitation for more attacks and is really sometimes suicidally detrimental to the interests of people dealing with Muslims. And I think the only way to Muslim powers, I should say, the only way to deal with Muslim political entities is with the standpoint of strength and not giving in and being absolutely, adamantly, fanatically stubborn and insistent on maintaining your demands and maintaining your interests, and essentially maintaining a wedge of power against the encroachment of Muslim political expansion. So I think that, again, that's force and strength is the only stance to be able to we can be able to adopt in the long run.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on Root Sheva, Israel National Radio. Show syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free to do so. And of course, you can send me an email at messiahhour@gmail.com, Our guest this afternoon is writer and political commentator Ze'ev Ben Yechiel. Zev, we were talking about some of the extremists of Islam. What if those would say, if you look at the Torah, there are some extreme things like death penalties, very tough death penalties, like throwing people off cliffs, and then if they don't die, we stone them. Things like if a girl, a daughter is raped, and the guy that rapes her pays 50 zuz, then he can marry her. Things like that. We have really tough things in the Torah that look pretty barbaric. So what if people say our religion is not that much different than Islam? What would you say to that?
So this is where Judaism actually differs from Islam or any other system that you can describe as genuinely barbaric. And that is that we have a central authority to interpret the written scriptural laws in a way that is in line with contemporary value systems, at least to the extent that it's consistent with the values within the Torah itself. And there's some that argue that these laws were interpreted literally back when they were given in the ancient times, and that they were appropriate for the societies, that they were appropriate for the Israelite Hebrew societies that existed at the time, and that was consistent with other societal norms in different cultures at the time. But we see, again, with the example of the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, the interpretation, the tradition says that the interpretation of this law wasn't literal even in the beginning. So again, the language of the Torah is extremely succinct, and it's often symbolic and allegorical, and it needs to be understood in its right context. And Judaism has a central authority for the interpretation of these laws to make sure that there is one authority that any claimant can go to and say, look, this doesn't seem right. And this is why, according to Jewish law, when the Jewish state is fully resurrected and you have a court system in the Sanhedrin, that there's an address to address any kind of issues that might come up. And furthermore, the way that the law is interpreted today, and has been since ancient times, since at least the time of the Talmud, and probably much earlier, that required some very, very stringent requirements to be met in any cases that involve the death penalty. In fact, we know that it goes back several hundred years before the time of the Talmud to about at least 200 years before the Common Era, when we had the men of the Great Assembly and the Sanhedrin before that. So really going back to the ancient Hebrew kingdoms, that the requirements that said the only way that you can actually put someone to death in any way is if you have two witnesses who saw the person committing the capital crime, and that he had to have been warned in advance by someone who saw him about to do it, and other requirements that are actually so hard to fulfill that they said that there was only a handful of times that the Sanhedrin ever actually executed anyone, and that any Sanhedrin that put more than one or two people, I don't remember which one it was, to death in 70 years was considered a bloodthirsty Sanhedrin. So it's a system that has extremely strict requirements for the application of the death penalty, possibly even more so than many Western societies today, including the United States, that do have the death penalty. And so I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. Now we have, of course, on the other side, we have biblical imperatives to conquer the land and in the process drive out all the inhabitants that oppose us. And that's a commandment that's also in a context. We're not commanded to take over the world. That is not a Jewish value. And in fact, Judaism discourages proselytization. We're not supposed to try to convince others of our faith because of our way of life, because it diverts energy from our true goal, which is to lead by example. And this is where Judaism fundamentally differs from Christianity and Islam, is that the way that Jews, and the way that the Jewish nation is going to save the world is not through the spread of its belief system, but by the embodiment of that belief system, by providing the world with an example of a perfect society. And of course, the Jewish people are still far from that, and we're still struggling to get back on our feet after 2,000 years of exile, and I think we have a ways to go. But I believe that we'll get there one day. But to compare Judaism to Christianity and Islam, when you're talking about things in the Torah that seem barbaric, that it's basically means that you don't really fully understand the context, because it really is an extremely just and humane system when it's applied correctly and understood correctly.
All right. Well, that has it for this episode. At the end of today's program, our guest has been Ze'ev Ben Yechiel, writer and social commentator. You're listening to the Ari Lewis Show on Route Sheva, Israel National Radio. And the show is syndicated as the Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is free to do so. Tell your friends and family to do the same thing, because the more people that subscribe to the channel, the higher this show will be up on YouTube searches, and that will increase the ratings. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints that this is a Jewish country, email me, messiahhour@gmail.com. And any topics you'd like me to discuss in the future, and anyone you'd like me to interview in the future, you can put that in the email as well. This is a very interactive show. And, of course, I'm on JApp. JApp is a Jewish application which features sharing for big rabbis as well as episodes of this program. You can find JApp through iTunes or Google Play Stores, or from the website www.j-app.me. And if you'd like to make a financial contribution to the program, you can do so through my PayPal account, israelsportsradio@yahoo.com. Zev, thanks for being on today. We greatly appreciate it. Zev for being on, and thank you everyone for listening. This is the Ari Lewis Show on IsraelNationalRadio.com.